Lab 257 by Michael C. Carroll. The Disturbing Story of the Government's Secret. Part 01. For a peaceful stroll where the air is a real tonic for a degraded man or woman, where you could have your anchovy and blackfish, sea bass and lobsters fresh out of the water, cooked until turned, milk, eggs and chicken galore, Plum Island was the ideal place. What more could you ask for? Plum Island Adventurer, 1909. Plum Island is a biological island in 3 Mile. Plum Island Employee, 2003. Preface. In May 1998, Sultan Bashiruddin Mahmud, a Western-educated nuclear physicist, was greeted by crowds gathered in Islamabad's narrow cobbled streets. They set off fireworks and held up large posters emblazoned with his image. As the powerful chairman of Pakistan's Atomic Energy Commission, Mahmud developed nuclear power plants with the help of Canada and other Western nations. Under the direction of the Pakistani government, Mahmud and others co-opted this technology and developed nuclear weapons, and in May its first atomic bomb was successfully tested to counter a nuclear test by its archenemy, neighboring India. A joyous national celebration followed in the name of Mahmud and other nuclear scientists, a celebration that rivaled Pakistan's Independence Day holiday. In 2002, he was under 24-hour house arrest and his assets were frozen. The clean-shaven, moderately religious nuclear engineer, educated in Britain in the early 1970s, had strayed to hardline Islamic views in the mid-1990s. The snow-white-haired Mahmud became an extremist. Genuine religious. He began to guess by reading people's palms and grew a long, unkempt beard. Urging Pakistan to adopt the Taliban way of life from neighboring Afghanistan, his writings emphasize the sanctity of keeping beards, the correlation between natural disasters and places of immoral behavior, and the hidden scientific knowledge of Allah contained in the Quran. After he doggedly opposed the nuclear test ban treaty in favor of a vigorous testing program of bombs, an apprehensive Pakistani leadership forced Mahmud out of the atomic energy program. He then moved to Kabul, Afghanistan, where he set up an aid organization called Taymir-e-Umma, or Islamic Reconstruction. A month after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in the United States Army intelligence and the CIA intercepted telephone communications between Mahmud and Taliban leader Mullah Muhammad Omar, whose oppressive and terrorist-sponsoring regime was about to be crushed by American forces. The U.S. government has declared Taymir-e-Umma, its Islamic charity, a terrorist front organization. His assets were confiscated by Pakistan's central bank, and Pakistani troops arrested our nuclear hero and turned him over to U.S. authorities. CIA Director George J. Tenet rushed to Islamabad to take personal control of the Mahmud case. During his interrogation over the phone calls, Mahmud claimed to have only discussed Omar's personal safety and a flour mill the charity wanted to build in Kandahar. But he failed separate lie detector tests and disputed the results, calling the technology a failure. He then admitted to having met on several occasions not only with Omar, but also with a rogue Saudi millionaire named Osama bin Laden, and his top deputy, al-Zawahiri, in August 2001. He described meeting bin Laden and Omar, perched on soft pillows, drinking green tea and praising Allah, in a scene reminiscent of video footage shown around the world with Osama bin Laden plotting destruction with his comrades. Fearing further embarrassment to its already tarnished nuclear energy program, Pakistan decided in early 2002 not to put Mahmud, whose noble cause was featured on the cover of the December 2001 issue of the brilliant radical newspaper Kashmir Jihad, on public trial. Instead, the Pakistani government accused him of violating oaths of national secrecy. Today, he remains under house arrest, and a media silencing order, in a closed 2-story house. After Pakistan arrested Sultan Bashir-ud-Din Mahmud and U.S. forces secured the Kabul perimeter as part of the Afghanistan phase of the U.S. War on Terrorism, CIA and U.S. Army commandos stormed Mahmud's Kabul residence and the offices of Taimur-e-Umma. Inside, they found copies of books he had authored, with disturbing titles like Mechanics of Doomsday in the Afterlife, and Cosmology and Human Fate, which contained the following prediction: during the fall of 2000 to 2001, due to the high solar cycle energy and its impact on people, certain crazy actions are likely to happen. Then they discovered a very incriminating raw material. One item was a diagram of a helium balloon designed to release large amounts of anthrax spores into the atmosphere. Another was a large document titled Bacteria, What You Need to Know. And a heavy file folder contained a sheaf of papers from an internet search on anthrax vaccines. Then there was a dossier. It contained information about a place in New York called the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. There was even a New York Times article in the dossier about this island. Why would an associate of Osama bin Laden be so interested in some obscure New York island? If Plum Island isn't exactly a household name in America, it apparently occupies a high place in the minds of people like Sultan Bashir-ud-Din Mahmud. And it's not the sandy beaches and palm trees thereafter. Less than 3.2 kilometers from the east end of Long Island and 130 kilometers from New York City is an unimposing 840-acre island, unmarked on most maps. In the few where it can be found, Plum Island is marked in red or yellow, stamped American government, restricted dangerous animal diseases. 6 huge ferries, each carrying 1,000 people and 120 cars, pass within a quarter of a mile of it every day, making the journey from Orient Point, at the tip of Long Island's North Fork, to New London, Connecticut. More than 1 million people live and spend their summers in the Hamptons, less than a mile or two from their shores. But few know the name of this pork chop-shaped island that sits on the outskirts of the largest population center in the United States. Fewer still can say whether it is inhabited or why it doesn't exist on the map. I have often been asked why I decided to write about Plum Island. In the summer of 1992, as part of a ritual before picking up a friend on the Connecticut to New York ferry, I drove to Orient Point, the end of the narrow strip of rural land that runs either side of Route 25. Abandoning my car at the end from the road, I walked a mile of long grass from the beach to the tip of Long Island. I climbed a high rocky cliff that sloped down to a sandbar that stretched down to the water until I came to an abrupt halt at an old lighthouse that looked more like a cast-iron coffee pot than a warning beacon. Crouching on the bluff, I watched the waves of Long Island Sound as they met the current of Gardiner's Bay, the precipice of the great Atlantic Ocean, colliding, spewing gusts of sand into the air and crashing against the shore. Through the light fog, 10 miles to the north, was the long coast of Connecticut. Between us, the ferry slowly approached me. Outside the lighthouse was a vast green landmass. It looked deserted except for a pale blue water tower that sprouted above a green canopy. The island sparked a series of thoughts, rumors of biological warfare tests, news of deadly virus experiments, talk of Lyme disease being incubated there. But it makes no sense, it looks so immaculate. What's going on out there? It's because the long white raft came into the foreground, sailing through Plum Gut, the narrow and deep between where I was and Plum Island. Returning to the car, I resolved one day to find out exactly what Plum Island is. Those were my thoughts for over a decade. Years later, fresh out of law school, I started revisiting that haunted place, trying to piece the puzzle together. To begin unraveling the realist, what happened, and still happens, behind the island's locked gates, I needed to educate myself on a variety of divergent topics. I dove into research on a wide range of far-reaching subjects: geology, colonial history, animal disease, human disease, animal psychology, microbiology, biological warfare, coastal artillery, terrorism, lighthouses, and American Indians. I spoke with scientists, government officials, locals, historians, and former and current Plum Island employees, collecting first-hand accounts of this inexplicably anonymous place. Friends thought I had become a bit fanatical about the subject. They were right. The passion of Plum, as he is called by those in the know, consumed me. Research has turned up unsettling descriptions of Plum Island, such as the bloodline of Andromeda and the island of Uncle Sam's No Escape and the setting of a novel by Ian Fleming. And my favorite, asking for directions to Plum Island is like asking for directions to Frankenstein's castle. A local newspaper took the opposite view, flippantly describing Plum Island as a place where scientists in white coats work on animal viruses before washing themselves, boarding a ferry and then having dinner with their families. It doesn't get more exciting or diabolical than that. As I delved deeper into the research and writing of this story, I went back to the science fiction novels I enjoyed as a child and came to a mind-numbing conclusion: science truth can actually be stranger than science fiction. I realized that the USDA is much more than healthy grade A eggs, and that vets are not all dogs who cautiously look after the well-being of golden retrievers and cheetahs. Once the story began to take shape, those mom and apple pie feelings quickly dissipated. I found Plum Island more than a nearby atoll, covered in a blanket of trees and secrets. The island's vibrant history dates back 350 years. It was once a former Indian fishing outpost, later settled by early English settlers, then a sheep and cattle farm, a Revolutionary War battlefield, a meeting place for an 1812, a coastal defense fort, an underwater mine factory and an Army biological warfare laboratory since 1954. Today, it is home to pristine beaches, cliffs, forests, ponds, swamps, trails, paths, roads, buildings and people, and the deadliest germs to ever roam the earth. On the last of my 6 trips to Plum Island, I toured the island's grounds with retired artist Ben Robbins. He carried a flashlight in the back pocket of his jeans and held a 2-foot machete in his left hand. We climbed through Spanish-American War-era army bunkers and coastal defense installations as thorns and bushes from everywhere slammed into my face. Ben knew every inch of Plum Island because he had to. For decades it was his job to draw the maps and blueprints. I quickly realized that Plum Island is like a reserve that hasn't known much orderly planting, pruning, or the occasional TLC. "We have industrial-grade poison ivy," Ben said, pointing to gray pea-sized curls reaching out to touch someone along the overgrown dirt tracks. "It's a dense jungle on the east coast, perhaps the most pristine, unkempt, undeveloped." We arrived at a high cliff at the eastern end of the island and entered an old army weather station. Above a dilapidated narrow staircase was a lookout room with a wind speed detector and suction cup swirling in the breeze, hand-painted signal flags, and a Morse code alphabet key. The room was filled with broken slatted window panes and bird dung. Heavy brush hid a stunning view of the Atlantic. Above a dilapidated narrow staircase was a lookout room with a wind speed detector and suction cup swirling in the breeze, hand-painted signal flags, and a Morse code alphabet key. The room was filled with broken slatted window panes and bird dung. Heavy brush hid a stunning view of the Atlantic. Above a dilapidated narrow staircase was a lookout room with a wind speed detector and suction cup swirling in the breeze, hand-painted signal flags, and a Morse code alphabet key. The room was filled with broken slatted window panes and bird dung. Heavy brush hid a stunning view of the Atlantic. As I left, I noticed a worn gray metal ammo storage box behind the door on the first floor. Brushing away decades of dust, I read a faded stencil printed sideways along the box: sprayer, chemical, engineering nurse, troop supply. I wondered what it was for. It is the highest point on the island, so outdoor tests of spraying pathogens or insect vectors would have been carried out from here. but Ben was out there calling my name. I ran to meet him and continued the tour. In the van heading back to the lab for lunch, I looked down at my khakis. A burst of heat went through my legs straight to my stomach when I saw about 8 tiny black dots, some on each pant leg. I immediately realized I was covered in ticks. I carefully tossed them to the floor of the minivan, wondering why I was walking through these overgrown woods in a short-sleeved shirt and no hat. Glancing at the front passenger seat, where Ben was chatting amiably with our driver, I noticed with new interest his long-sleeved red knit baseball cap. I tried to stay calm, but I was sweating like crazy. It didn't help that a horrible burning smell joined us in the van at that moment, hard to describe except to say the stench reminded me of something noxious that shouldn't be burned or smelled. Then we saw a thick cloud slowly creeping southwest. Ben turned to me and yelled, "Look, it's time to burn the animals." The billowing black cloud was heading for Gardiner's Island, on its way to greet Sag Harbor and the Hamptons. When we stopped for lunch at the lab, I excused myself and went to the men's room. There I stole 7 ticks from my shirt and 4 more from the inside of my pant leg. I tore my fingers through my scalp, tilting my head towards the mirror in desperation, not knowing what to do if I saw a small black dot stuck to my skin. Nervous as hell, I entered the cabin, stripped off my clothes, and examined every inch of fabric and every inch of my body. 3 more ticks met their end in the toilet. Fortunately, I didn't find anything and wouldn't hire anything. The rest of the day, I took more black spots off my clothes and covered it up. My head with my hands as we walked under the trees. The uncomfortable connections between West Nile virus, Lyme disease, and Plum Island unfortunately proved difficult to dismiss as my research deepened. Of course, you can't persuade an island to speak for itself. To trace Plum Island's history, then, one must see the people who touched the place. They may have been there for a month or 35 years, or they may never have set foot on its soil, but somehow they shaped Plum Island. Through the lives of these individuals and the common thread they share, the story unfolds. Among the key people in this book is Dr. Jerry Callis, a Georgia farm boy who dedicated his life to researching animal diseases and rose through the government hierarchy to run Plum Island for over 30 years. There is the successor of Dr. Callis, Dr. Roger Breeze, an Englishman swept up by American meritocracy, in search of the grail of scientific glory. There are those who have been caught in the crossfire, people like Philip Curry, a support worker mired in a biological meltdown during a violent hurricane, a catastrophe that would have been easily averted had it not been for the recklessness of the administration, and Francis de Morest, one of the most told people, who paid a terrible price for speaking out. And while there are no 3-headed chickens or 5-legged cows, as the USDA is quick to point out with a laugh, you will be introduced to Nazi germ warfare scientists, ancient American Indians, germ warriors, germ hunters, Mexican cowboys, the father of anthrax, virus outbreaks in New York's backyard, and a biological and environmental mess about to boil over. An Englishman enraptured by American meritocracy, in search of the grail of scientific glory. There are those who have been caught in the crossfire, people like Philip Curry, a support worker mired in a biological meltdown during a violent hurricane, a catastrophe that would have been easily averted had it not been for the recklessness of the administration, and Francis de Morest, one of the most told people, who paid a terrible price for speaking out. And while there are no 3-headed chickens or 5-legged cows, as the USDA is quick to point out with a laugh, you will be introduced to Nazi germ warfare scientists, ancient American Indians, germ warriors, germ hunters, Mexican cowboys, the father of anthrax, virus outbreaks in New York's backyard, and a biological and environmental mess about to boil over. An Englishman enraptured by American meritocracy, in search of the grail of scientific glory. There are those who have been caught in the crossfire, people like Philip Curry, a support worker mired in a biological meltdown during a violent hurricane, a catastrophe that would have been easily averted had it not been for the recklessness of the administration, and Francis de Morist, one of the most old people, who paid a terrible price for speaking out. And while there are no three-headed chickens or five-legged cows, as the USDA is quick to point out with a laugh, you will be introduced to Nazi germ warfare scientists, ancient American Indians, germ warriors, germ hunters, Mexican cowboys, the father of anthrax, virus outbreaks in New York's backyard, and a biological and environmental mess about to boil over. Plum Island demands a carefully written and unbiased look, not from both sides, but from all sides. He needs to be investigated by someone who is not obsessed with eradicating government waste and corruption, or married to conspiracy theories. The purpose of this book, therefore, is to explore in depth the last half-century on Plum Island, half a century of biological experimentation and scientific discovery, obscured by agitation, concealment, and surprisingly careless management. The people of Plum Island are, in many ways, the gang that couldn't shoot properly. Except here, this gang's ammunition is the deadliest germ known to mankind. I hope the work presented here sheds some light on Plum Island's fascinating history. That provoke a frank and open discussion between the public and your government about protecting present and future generations from the avoidable catastrophes that lurk in our midst before the avoidable becomes inevitable. Lab 257 by Michael C. Carroll. The Disturbing Story of the Government's Secret. And Part 01.